And the girl who was my biggest rival, she used that space. She owned that space because that was one of her psychological kind of things. That's what she did. That's how she commanded the fact that she was the best in the world. But I quickly got the measure of her, and I think as soon as I'd beaten her that first time and taken a world record off her, then it levelled the playing field, and I felt much more in control in that room. It did mean she walked a bit less as well.
Sarah, I'm going to weigh in straight away with your moment in time. When we ask this question of guests, just to give everyone a flavour who's listening or watching, we normally get a really clear response back. But I got about 8 different options from you about what your moment in time might be. So I've waded through them, and each has their own merits, of course they do. But I think where we should probably start is at the beginning. And this was one of your suggestions. I often feel that the first instinct is normally the right one anyway. So let's go with what you suggested first, which was your first games, the 1992 Barcelona Games, and what happened as a result of that and that experience and everything afterwards. So will you tell it in your words, because it's your story, not mine?
Well, I was 14 when I got selected for my first games. I was coming to the end of year 9. So it was very similar time, you know, the early summer in 1992. And I'd done my options. I knew what my GCSE courses were going to be from the September. But there was this little fact of the fact that I was going to be late back to school in year 10 because I had just been selected for the games. And I think the enormity of that dream coming true, I'd always dreamed from being 6 that I could follow Sarah Hardcastle as another Sarah into swimming. And then when it finally arrived, it really had to shape me. I had to grow up very quickly. They knew, the swim team staff knew that I had the potential to win, and they had to kind of make sure that I navigated the pressures of that. And I also was very fortunate to find mentors in the team who I gravitated towards, they gravitated towards me perhaps, and those people are still very prominent in public life today. So Baroness Tanny Gray-Thompson being one of them, and Lord Chris Holmes being the other. So I couldn't have wished for a better start really. But yeah, no, I think it shaped me just because I had to deal with so much more than the average 14-year-old.
Yeah, so tracking back even further, you know, most kids get in a pool, splash around a bit, and we try desperately. I mean, I've got an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old, so my sole intention at the moment is just to make sure they can, you know, stay above the water and keep themselves well. So what changes in someone like your mindset where you're, you know, from the splashing around in a pool to serious competition to the prospect of Olympic competition at the age of just 14?
So for me, I'd learned to swim. So our primary school had a swimming club, which was very unusual back then. It's incredibly unusual now. But we'd had a devastating situation in our village where one of the children from our school drowned in the canal. So the parents got together and decided that could never, ever happen again. And Disley Dolphins was born. And the club doesn't exist anymore, but we'd go up to the local leisure centre every Saturday, and the school hired the entirety of the afternoon at that 4-lane 25-metre pool. So every child learned to swim, and they were basically enrolled upon it as soon as they started. And it's a relatively small primary school. So everybody did that, and I learned to swim just like all the other children, but I loved it. I really enjoyed that process of learning to move through the water quickly. And then I discovered, you know, racing. The school had its annual gala every year. So by the time I was 6, I was racing at the school gala and against other schools that were relatively local. And then I watched the Olympics in 1984 in Los Angeles, and I saw the swimmers there, the swim team, Sarah Hardcastle winning her medals. And I was just absolutely enthralled and thought, well, if this is where I've started and this is what I love doing, that's where I could go. If they've done it, why not me? So that's really where it started. And I've never been particularly great at splashing around in a pool, perhaps because I just learned to try and go fast from the beginning. I'm trying hard to be better at it now.
So going from this sort of young kid who then is inspired by the inspiration of Olympic greats before her, and then you find yourself on that stage. So what is the conversation like which says you're going to the Olympics? What happened in that moment, and how did you feel?
So it had all started about 9 months before the selection. I'd gone to a different type of competition where I could be selected to go to the regional. There was the regional championships going towards the national championships. And there was a lady at that particular gala that said, you need to be going to the national team now. you are so incredibly good that we can't keep you just at the regional level. So they sent me to Birmingham, where the national team were training at the beginning of November 1991, I think middle of November. And I spent the weekend training with the national team, who were preparing to be in that final selection group for the Games in 1992. And I started in lane 6, at the back of lane 6. And by the end of the first session, I was leading lane 1. And they were like, oh, you're quite good. And I was just like absolutely gunning every length as fast as possible. There's no chance I was slowing down. I was like, need to impress these people. Next year, this is what I want to do. And so they accepted me onto the British swim team that very evening, really. And I was then part of the programme. And with that, they had a plan to help us to race more, because I was 14. I'd never raced long course, 50 metres. So they had this plan to help those of us who'd not raced 50 metres before get some exposure to that. That's where I was first taken to Lanzarote to learn to swim 50 metres outside, because everything in the UK is indoors. So as a backstroker that I was, learning to swim outside where you've got no roof to follow, to go straight. So there was all these different parts of the process that we had to really tick off, alongside keep posting times, keep posting things that push you up the world rankings, and keep making sure that you put your name into that selection pot, so that when the selectors get together, I think it was the beginning of May, to look at who was there and where the world rankings were, your name was as far up those rankings as possible. And I think the time I posted at the end of March put me into the top 2 in the world. So it wasn't a foregone conclusion, still had to get through the selection, but it was giving myself every chance.
And then you get to Barcelona. And what's that feeling like as a kid, sort of not just the stage that you're on and the competition that you're in, but the whole environment around you being at an Olympic Games?
So we started, there was no internal flight. So we started by being driven down to Heathrow. We got the flight with all the team. We waited ages back in those days. There was no digital cameras where you send your photo for the accreditation in ahead of the Games. So you waited in a really long queue for a passport photo to be taken, and then you got your accreditation. So you're learning all the time about the processes that you're going to need come competition time. And I was racing 9-day competition. I think I raced 7 or 8 of those days. So the process of every day getting up, going to the heats, making sure you'd timed your food right, making sure you had the right snacks. You're basically looking after yourself. And I was always very independent at home, but suddenly you're thrust into a place where, yes, there's backup, but it's not your parents who are the backup. So you have to grow up very quickly. You have to suddenly understand all of that logistics, all of that housekeeping. And then, of course, you come back, you've got sweaty kit because you've done gym sessions, you've got swimming costumes to wash and dry. So even the laundry was your own to do as well. And I think that was probably the big stark difference to any other competition, because normally you'd go there with your parents, and then suddenly you've just got to pick up what you've got to do for yourself and make it work, and then make it work for race day on the biggest event that you've ever done in your life. Did you go there
to win or to experience it? Which seems like a dumb question to ask an Olympic champion who's won like countless gold medals. But in that first experience, what were you expecting of yourself?
So I went to win. I wanted to win my races, but I went there with the primary focus of swimming faster than I'd ever swum before. And you could argue, well, that's easy to do because you've not done that many 50-metre races. So you have 2 sets of personal best times as a swimmer. You have your short course times for 25-metre pool. You have your long course times. And I'd done mainly long course, but what happened to mainly short course. But what happened was that I beat all of my short course PBs, personal best times, in the long course pool. And the reason why a short course pool is quicker for most people is because you're faster through the turns, and you're faster when you're in a streamlined position doing your butterfly kicks underwater. And I was always good at starts and turns. So for me, short course was quite significantly quicker, certainly towards the end of my swimming career when I was even more powerful as an older athlete. So for me to beat all my personal best times from the short course pool in that long course pool was obviously the first sort of challenge, but I had gone there to win. But I did learn very quickly, you can't focus on the outcome because everybody wants to win. You do have to focus on the things that are going to make sure that you're in the position on the blocks to do the best race you possibly can. And then hopefully from that comes that gold medal.
And it did. I mean, you did record those two goals and 3 other medals as well during that time. And what was the response like with the people that were around you in that moment? Because I'm guessing that you're significantly younger than most people in that mix. What was their sort of reaction to what you were doing out there? I mean, they must have been thinking, this is extraordinary.
So I was one of 3 14-year-olds at the games. I wasn't the youngest. There was 2 other girls who were like within 6 weeks, but younger than me. And there was a couple of others who were 15 and 16. So there was a cohort of teenagers, younger teenagers, I suppose you could say. But for me, and one of the other teenagers, 15-year-old Claire, she won gold on the very last day in the 50 metres freestyle. I think there were some people who weren't surprised, those of them in the team, because they'd seen me kind of sort of announce myself at that very first training weekend. But equally, there was lots of people who were just so delighted that it had all come together and I'd held my nerve. There is so much pressure from, you'll hear athletes all the time talking about the call-up room. You don't really get a sense of that call-up room properly until you're about to walk out for a championship medal. Yes, you've got them at national championships, and yes, you've got them at other competitions, but the biggest of them all is that championship call room. And sometimes there's 2 of them as well. So you go to the initial sort of corralling room and then you go into the final call. So those 2 spaces are very, very different to anything you'll have experienced before. And then you're announced out onto poolside in front of a full house. And swimming galas at home generally don't have that much space for spectators. This had 2 stands, one on each side of the pool, one at the end of the pool, and they'd opened up another temporary stand as well because the demand for spectator tickets was just so high. So it is a very different experience, and it's not a foregone conclusion that everyone can handle that level of pressure. I think I've always been fortunate to be sort of quite an internal person, and although I can be the life and soul of a party, I'm also quite internalized with a lot of the things that I do, which I think helps you to manage and also equate what you're thinking and be calm.
I suppose that's the thing. You don't know until you're in the moment whether that's going to be something that you respond well to or not. So in that cool room environment that you talk about, just describe for us what that looks like and what that feels like and what it felt like in those really early days and at that first games.
So in the Barcelona call room, I seem to recall it was more of a horseshoe shape of chairs. And that's the other thing. I think some call rooms are sort of very linear. So you've got the first row is the people who are racing next, and then behind them, and you all move down the chairs until it's your turn. In Barcelona, it was almost like a horseshoe and you moved round. So not only could you see the people you were racing, you could see everybody else who was either just before or just after you. And there's never normally more than 3 events or 3 races in that final call. And the girl who was my biggest rival, she used that space. She owned that space. She walked through every inch of that space, I think deliberately, and everyone else did too, because that was one of her psychological kind of things. That's what she did. That's how she commanded the fact that she was the best in the world, and she hadn't been beaten. So I watched this, and I guess it was that naivety maybe. It made me chuckle a little bit because I was sat there not wasting my energy and she was marching around. And I saw that as my advantage over her because she'd been marching around and I was conserving my legs ready for that start, which was my, the thing that I was going to certainly my turns, hopefully take away from her. So it was one of those situations where you think, actually, I'm happy here. And it came to pass because when we got into the pool, my start was better than hers. Although when I first popped up, I thought I could see her feet right next to, or I could see her feet and I was behind her. But in fact, there was so much splash coming from her arms that to me, it looked like her feet were right next to me. And actually, I was ahead of her by half a body length after just, 15 metres. So I think maybe whether that was just innate ability to handle somebody else's tactics, if you like. But I quickly got the measure of her. And I think as soon as I'd beaten her that first time and taken a world record off her, then it levelled the playing field and I felt much more in control in that room. And it did mean she walked a bit less as well.
Do those call rooms, as you go through various different games and life and experience and doing this again and again and again, of which you've done it so many times now, does that become an easier environment to be in, or does the pressure just grow?
I think it's different every day. It certainly feels different. Every call room is ever so slightly different, even in cycling. So in a time trial, the call is kind of a row of chairs either side of where they're checking the dimensions of your bike, that they conform to the rules of and regulations of the of cycling. And so you could be opposite, you could be next to, but there's no kind of specific order. You just know what your start time is. So you could be at the very back of the tent and walk past everybody and then go to the front. So it's a little bit less ordered. Whereas in swimming, they have like lane numbers on each chair. And if you're not in the right chair, then you're sort of in big trouble, if you like. So I think it never gets easier, but I think you just have different coping strategies. And it also depends on the position you're in as an athlete, because you're not going into every race in exactly the same condition as before. And there will be times where you have to race where you don't feel like you're ready. They don't delay, other than for a global pandemic, they don't delay the race because you're not ready. So you'll have to go in there and handle that pressure regardless of whether you feel like you're ready to do that. And you have to come up with those coping strategies before you get there to make sure that you arrive on the start line in the best shape of mind you can be to perform. And I haven't felt 100% on every single start line that I've ended up going on to win, but I think it's been about how I've handled the surroundings and maximised my strengths, minimised the things that were affecting that feeling, to make sure that it didn't impact the outcome.
Back to Barcelona, because you must have gone to those games as this sort of bright-eyed 14-year-old and learnt a shed load in that period of time that you were there. Did you come back the same person or a different person, do you think?
I think I came back a wiser person. I think I came back with so much more experience of culture, of languages, of how to look after myself, of logistics, just general housekeeping. I'd made sure that I was ready to race on 7 out of 9 competition days. I'd gone on 6 medals, 2 world records. I'd contributed to 2 relay teams as well, so it wasn't just about me, it was about me and 3 other women, and so I'd had so many different experiences, and that had given me that chance to grow and mature. And I did come back and say, I feel as though I could go to university. That ability to handle yourself independently, we talk about university being that independent study. It's up to you, it's down to you whether or not it's successful. And that's very much what it's like at championships. You can have all the support network behind you that you need, but when you get to the blocks, when you get to the race, it's only you that can affect the outcome then. Everybody else has to let you go, that they have to cut the coat ties and let you get on with it. So when that comes back to everyday life, it feels as though being constrained a little bit is harder to adapt to. And I was always very organised with my schoolwork. I knew that I needed to have an education behind me in case I was ill or injured or couldn't compete or wasn't good enough anymore. So I was very diligent, and that meant that I was seen as a bit of a SWAT. I was very organised because I'd had to be for 3 weeks to get myself through to the medals that I did. And so I guess to other children, I was probably more of a grown-up who was in the same uniform.
And I guess that is hard, isn't it? Because, when you're an outlier in your field, which you evidently are, and you come back with these medals around your neck and having had this extraordinary experience, there's going to be, in a class full of other 14-year-olds, there's going to be jealousy. There's going to be, definitely people are going to feel that you're different to them in that way. And how was that reaction? We talk about the reaction from your teammates. What was the reaction like from people when you came home in the classroom?
So I guess the contrast was, whereas my teammates were very much like, this is really cool, we're doing this alongside her. Some of us have won the same colour medals, some of us have won medals and stood on the podium together. The 2 relay teams, we won silver medals, so that was incredible. But then when you get home, you're all aiming to do the best you can, hopefully, in your exams to move on to what you want to do at A-level and then potentially at university, depending on what your ambitions are for the future. But I also had this side career, if you like. I was already in a career that could take me places that was not accessible to anybody else, whereas in the classroom any career is an option if you want to take on that subject, whereas I had this sort of VIP route, if you like, out of school. If I was doing physio sessions, if I had competitions, if I had training weekends, and I didn't do a full week of school in that final 2 years. My work was taken with me on the road. I think I had about 80% attendance, but everything was done and in on time. I got A's in my GCSEs, and so everyone could see that I was managing 2 careers. And I guess what that did was meant that I've always been pretty good at juggling multiple hats, but I guess if you've got teenagers who are looking across at that, they wouldn't necessarily have thought, well, why is that possible? Why is that allowed? You know, because as a child at school, you have to conform to so many rules, and it appeared like I'd reinvented the rules because I'd had this incredible opportunity that I'd been able to make successful and had to kind of manage alongside getting the grades at the same time.
And how did that like manifest itself? Because on a day-to-day basis, when you're just, like you say, you're just trying to sort of, you know, get along. You're just trying, like you and I have spoken loads of times about this before. You're just trying to kind of, you know, get through what you want to do because you know what your end game is and you want to go there as quickly as possible, but you've got to go through the process. So on a day-to-day basis, what was school like post-Barcelona?
So my day would start at 4:45, where I'd get my mum or dad up with a cup of tea. That was the non-negotiable. If you want to go morning training, I need a cup of tea before I take you. So I got my bag ready the night before. I'd get up, make the tea, take it to them, go, I'm up and I'm ready and we're going training. And
Wow.
that was because they wanted to make sure that it was me leading. And
do you realise now, like how, I'm not going to say nuts, that's not fair, but like how self-motivated that is. I mean, most parents of young children will be listening to that and thinking, what? You did what? Really? Like how? And so you must have recognised that in yourself. I mean, I know, like you say, your mum and dad gave you sort of an ultimatum. This is a cup of tea and then we'll take you. But you still did it.
Yeah, I was 15, and I think, you know, we're talking about all sorts of the pressures and challenges on 15-year-olds. My parents were just genius, I think. You know, if I wanted to do this, I had to do it. It had to be me. And maybe because I'd been at those games for 3 weeks and I'd looked after myself so someone was cooking my dinner and I went to the food hall to get it, but I still had to do all of that other. It takes ages to do everything in a games village as well, because the laundry's miles away. The food hall is not like in your room. So you have to be organised and time things. You have to be good with your time management. So maybe that had helped me compared to the average 15-year-old who you're trying to get them to get the PE kit ready or make sure they know which week of the timetable they're on. But that was it. And I didn't really think anything of it. I desperately wanted to go morning training. I really wanted to do more training to become that better athlete. And that was laid there. And so fair enough, that's what I'll do. So we'd leave the house just before 5. They'd drop me at 5:15. I'd get onto poolside. I'd already be in my swimming costume, so all I had to do was take my tracksuit off. My school uniform was in my bag for after training. And when I got out of the water at 8 o'clock, so I'd train from 5:30 till 8 o'clock. I'd get out of the water at 8. I'd go through the showers, get myself into my uniform, straight outside, back into the car where my mum would be with a pint of milk and a massive kind of like ice cream container of cereals. I'd have a pint of milk on top of my cereal. I'd have a second pint of milk to drink. And once I'd eat my food in the car and I'd drink the milk on the way to class. And I used to take the bottle, because it was glass milk bottles, and I'd take it into the canteen and the dinner ladies would put it in with their bottle recycling. And in the end, after a couple of weeks, they said, don't come round, just knock on the window, because that was literally past into my door to get into the high school. So I'd knock on the window, give them the bottle into class, but I'd still have wet hair. So I'd arrive at class not looking very polished. All of the other girls looked like they'd been through full camera ready, kind of like
hair and makeup.
Yeah, hair and makeup, VIP red carpet as I would know it now. And I would just be filing into whichever space was available on my own. So like at the back, there was never a space next to another of the girls. And then I'd just get on with my day. I'd do my homework or go running at lunchtime. I'd get some of my land training done at lunchtime because nobody really, they never ever made space for me. Very quickly, nobody made space for me to be with them. So very quickly I was isolated away.
How do you mean? What do you mean by that? They didn't make space?
I'd go in for dinner, like would queue up, and when I turn round, wherever the other people I'd arrived with were, there was never a space for me to sit with them. So they'd always somehow, whether it's deliberate or not, manufacture a table that was just about big enough. So if there was 9 of us, there'd be a table for 8 instead of 10. They'd always seem to find a way to make sure, and no one would hutch up. There'd never be a case of, oh, Sarah's here, hutch up. Whereas if somebody else had arrived late, they would perhaps hutch up. So I was quickly sort of isolated, and I stopped eating in the canteen at school. I'd take my own lunch, or I'd use my money, and after from year 10 you were allowed to go into the village to get your lunch if you wanted. So I'd sometimes walk into the village and get my lunch there, except I didn't get my lunch because I never really felt like eating, so I'd just do something else. And that's probably where my disordered eating started, was I'd just skip meals because I'm better at it now. You get used to eating in a hotel room by yourself. But as a 15-year-old, I'd spent 3 weeks in a very sociable village eating with people from all around the world, and then suddenly I'm in this position where I'm on my own. And I don't mind being on my own. I never did mind the loneliness. It was more the fact that I just didn't fit in, and I just was living sort of the Monday to Thursdays for my Fridays to get away to my sport. And I was so excited to leave school to go back to training. So I'd get through the day and I'd get picked up at 3:30. I'd go back to training 4:30 till 7:30. And then and then from 7:30 I'd get picked up home, more food, homework, straight to bed, because I'd have to get up again and make the cup of tea. And that's basically how it rolled most, sort of at least 3 days of the week. And then the other days I would either get taken to school a bit later so I could have a bit of a lie-in, or it would be a day where I wasn't in because I had physio, or I had to go and do something connected to, being a British athlete.
Isn't that interesting, though, how something like an eating disorder can manifest itself off the back of, like you say, you've come back from this really successful time, and then you're back in the school environment, which, then those things start to happen, which make you feel isolated. And very quickly, someone who has so much to be proud of and should have so much self-esteem and everything else, it can get on top of you. So how did you get yourself out of that? More than, how it took hold. How did it take hold? And then how were you able to sort of move it on and get out of it?
Well, I'd been told by school that I could bring my medals in for one day and then not talk about it after that. I just needed to crack on and be a student. And I think that was a double-edged sword, because whilst it was done with the best of intentions, that it wasn't going to become a distraction with, medals flying around a classroom. It equally meant that people thought I was a bit prim, she never talks about it. But then I'd been advised not to. So I was always going to take that advice, because the senior leaders of the school were incredibly supportive, and, they'd always help out if I needed extra time, or I had a problem. I could go and speak to them and say, in fact, one of the deputy heads, his wife had been my year 6 teacher. So I would go and speak to him and just say, this time and this clashes and this exam, and there was a situation where I was needed to go and do something with the British Paralympic Association, and it was during the mock exams for my GCSEs at the end of 1993, and he said, well, that's fine, Sarah, you can just do your mock exams in the day before you leave, and you're not going to be in touch with any of the students, so it's not like you can give away what's in the exam. He said, but you do have to be prepared that you're going to do 3 days of exams in one day. Are you up for it? I was like, well, I'm up for anything if it means I can do this particular event and this trip. So he's like, right, okay. So he did that. So they were so supportive and helpful, but maybe that was also seen as being a favourite, even though it wasn't. It was just kind of constructive support. So it really rumbled on all through the winter of 1992 into 1993. And I went to the British Junior Championships at the end of February in 1993, early part, and one of the other parents said to my dad, has Sarah been poorly this winter? And because it had sort of gradually been the weight falling off me, I'd become a better cross-country runner. I was winning all of the regional cross-country stuff because I was lighter. I wasn't this muscular swimmer. So it didn't really seem that it was an issue, but he sort of did a double take and thought, she does look a bit gaunt, she does look a bit too thin.
Were your performances dropping in the pool or not?
No, and that was the thing. You see, that's why my parents didn't really notice until someone pointed it out. It was a gradual process. I was eating, but just not enough. And I was running well, and I loved my running, and I was a happy swimmer. I was swimming well. So it hadn't happened over a long enough period to cause any issues. The only thing I had noticed was that my periods had stopped. So I did know that it wasn't healthy, and in the heart of hearts knew it wasn't the right thing. But I felt in control of it there. I was in control of the amount I was eating, and that meant that I was in control of the thing whereas I wasn't in control of whether or not people hutched up for me at lunch, or wanted to sit next to me in classrooms, or wanted to be my friend. And And so my mum took me down to our GP, and she was just incredible. And she just gave me a talking to, really. She goes, if you want to be an international athlete for as long as I think you're capable of being an athlete for, you're going to have to sort this out. You can't sustain what you're doing athletically and this amount of eating. She said, what you've described to me today is probably close to half of what you need. If I'm being generous, it's 3/4, but it's probably half of what you need. And you're certainly not getting the nutrients. So although I was eating fruit and vegetables and I was really cutting down on things like carbohydrates, she said, you're still not getting enough, and that will strain your muscles. You're much more likely to get injured, especially as you're running so well. That will be a temptation to run more. So you're going to have to sort this out. And she also said, and your bone density will be affected, which means as an old lady like me, and I don't think she was very old, as an old lady like me, if you fall over, you'll break your leg. So it was just the talking to I needed. And she kind of put it into a really immense perspective, like the way that she opened up the entire world to me. And she stopped it being so focused on high school and children and problems. And she basically said, this time next year, you will be leaving school. You will be approaching your GCSEs. You'll be on study leave. I was like, oh, wow. She goes, 12 months. That's all you've got to do. And then you can go to college, because she already knew that I wasn't going to stay at high school because they didn't do the courses I wanted for A-level.
But isn't that amazing? Because she basically chimed straight. It's what people talk about all the time, these sliding doors moments. If you hadn't have had that conversation with that person who was speaking your language at the time you needed to hear it, who had a much bigger perspective on life and was thinking big picture as you needed her to do, God knows where that would have ended up.
I know, and in my work now, in my sort of day job, I reference that GP because we know so many of our societal ills are down to the fact that our healthcare in our communities is not where it used to be or needs to be. People say, oh, back in my day, the doctor visited you at home. Well, yes, that's because every doctor knew all of their patients quite personally. And certainly that was the case for us. Every single family GP has been somebody that has known us quite well. And we're fortunate that that is actually still the case, but only because we've lived here forever. But that really demonstrates the power of the fact that I wasn't going to become a burden to the healthcare service. Because she said to me, if we can't sort this out the way I'd like to today, you'll have to be diagnosed with disordered eating, which could lead to a diagnosis of anorexia. And then we're going down a process that you don't get out of until we decide that you're well. That could incur hospital stays where you will do what we tell you to do until, your body is capable of functioning. She said, so the fact your periods have stopped is the first sign that your body isn't working the way it should. So I think it was really clever, and I really hope that we could find a way back to that level of personal care, because not every GP knows their patients, because there's so many. You
must look back at that moment. Like, we talk about moments in time and pivotal moments in this podcast all the time, but you must look back at that moment and think, if I hadn't have had that conversation with that particular GP, where would I have ended up? Because like you say, that once you're in that system, it's a completely different kettle of fish.
No, absolutely. And, it's quite a profound thing to say, but maybe I do owe her my entire career, because I was a really happy, it's like a sliding door. One part of the day I'd walk into school and be incredibly unhappy, and then the other part of the day I'd walk into my sporting world and be incredibly happy. I was almost like two different people, and the kids at school probably wouldn't have recognised the Sarah from sport. And I was fortunate, there was a handful of children who I saw in the sporting environment. There wasn't nobody doing swimming too, but they were in different year groups. And those are the kids, or adults now, that I'm still in touch with. But so many people from school, I didn't really get a chance. They didn't get a chance to get to know the real Sarah, because the immediate people around me in my class had kind of made up stories about the sort of person that I was. And, I guess arriving at school with wet hair and looking like death warmed up because of the amount of training I'd already done that day was the first reason for them to exclude me, because I didn't look as polished and ready for the day as they did, even though inside I was very ready for the day, because I knew I needed to get through this process of my GCSEs to move on in the world as all teenagers do.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it, thinking about it, because when you look back, what it did give you is a resilience that a lot of kids wouldn't have got at that time through basically being, an outlier and to some degree isolated by your peer group. I mean, in some ways we all say this, we're shaped by all sorts of things that happen along the way to us and mostly by the knocks. Do you think that, the way that you were treated by your peer group during that time has made you largely the person that you are now?
Oh, definitely. You develop broad shoulders. We talk about being able to handle different people's opinions and not worrying about what people think about you. And my parents said to me, you don't need to worry about what they think because they're not going to be making decisions about you. For the vast majority of those children, you'll not come across them ever again in your life. Some people say that they're still in touch with everyone from school, but you don't have to be if it's not the right people. And so for me, it meant that I was happy to know that I was doing the right thing. It was what I wanted to do. I wasn't hurting them. I wasn't breaking the law. I wasn't doing anything unpleasant or unkind. I just wasn't their person. And so it really did teach me that not everyone will approve of what you're doing or like what you're doing or resonate with what you're doing. But when you find the people that do, and for me, that was in my sports team, my swim teammates, still in touch with them all, wherever they happen to be in the world now, which is, I think, very telling about that time of my life. And I know that if I picked up the phone, jumped on a video call, we'd have so much to talk about. Whereas quite often if you do occasionally bump into someone who said, "Oh, I went to school with you," there's like, "Oh, which bit did you fit into? Which bit of the school?" Because I largely blocked that bit out. And it's a shame, really, because I'm actually in touch with a number of my teachers, and they were so brilliant. So my form tutor, who felt helpless because it was psychological, warfare, if you like. It was walking into the girls' toilets and being locked in a cubicle. I locked myself in because I'd realised someone had come in to start talking about me, and I didn't really want to confront that. I didn't really want to let them know that I could hear them, because it just seemed like a waste of energy trying to confront that. And I'm still in touch with my PE teachers. One of my PE teachers is part of UK Anti-Doping, so I see her at events and things. So it's amazing how the people that I've stayed in touch with, and the ones that I haven't, I hope that if we meet and we have some common ground and we can chat, that we find a way to kind of, whether my assumptions of what had happened, me being different and having this other career was hard for them. And I don't hold any grudges to anybody. I'm grateful, like you say, because it does shape you and it gives you that resilience and thick skin, because you do need that. You need to be able to take, people's opinions of you all the time.
Exactly. When you think about all those learnings that even happened at the age of 14 at that Barcelona Games, and everything that you learned during that time, and then subsequently what happened in the classroom after that, and how it ends up shaping you. You wonder about the different decisions and career choices that you would have made along the way had things have been different. I mean, like you say, you had, by circumstance and by, unfortunate scenario, you had this ear infection, which then meant that you had to switch lanes, so to speak, from swimming to cycling. Do you think if you hadn't have had those sort of early experiences at 14 and everything that happened after that, you would have had the sort of wherewithal to go, actually, well, we can park this and we can take this on?
Yeah, I think what it taught me was that there's to be solutions driven. So in order to feel comfortable with the fact that I was managing this sort of psychological challenge with my life at school, I had to find a solution so that I felt back in control. And that control couldn't be going back to disordered eating. It had to be different control. It had to be accepting the situation. So I had to accept that I wasn't going to be popular at school and find a way through that I felt like less scrutiny or whatever it might be, so that it didn't affect me and drag me down from a sports perspective. So when you're faced with other challenges, you have to accept the situation you're in. So whether it was my ear infections or breaking my ankle or crashing and then ending up with a collapsed lung, you can't change the position you're in. You can't make it different. You can't wind back the clock and the sliding door is slid, if you like. So you have to go with what you dealt with, that card. And it's how you turn it into a positive. So for me, not being allowed to swim, being told you have an indefinite amount of time out the water, the ear infections have taken hold. And it was my outer ear, so it wasn't like an immune system thing. It was the function of the ear of the ear tissue out in the outer ear. It was all swollen and it was risk of closing my ear canal. So continually getting it wet, even to wash my hair, was a bit of a challenge. So I had to find ways to stay fit. I had to find ways to stay alert as an athlete, and that meant, you know, weighing up my options, and the best option at that point seemed to be to use a bike to stay fit. And little did I know that, well, I should have guessed, I suppose, the competitive side of me would like, oh, maybe I could race a bike. And I guess that's what I've been doing probably the last few months, is that since I've not been allowed to, since I broke my ankle, I've had to go into a rehab phase, which has been quite extensive. But I've always looked for ways to stay fit, to be in the best possible shape I can be, so that when I'm allowed back to racing, had subsequent surgery on a saddle injury, which means I can't sit on a saddle now for a significant period of time, which keeps me out of off the bike for even longer. So these challenges keep sort of stacking. But I know that I've got the mindset that will say, okay, I can't do this, but I can do that. And focusing on what you can do has always been kind of a mantra in our family, even from, being small. Like, what can you do then? If that's too difficult today, it might not be tomorrow. What can you do today? And I guess that's, definitely helped me. And it was without doubt shaped by, what can I do about these attitudes towards me of my peers? I can't do a great deal because that this is just the way things are, and they're fighting for themselves. Teenage years are hard for everybody regardless of their circumstance, so all I can do is focus on me and be kind to me and the people around me.
When you had that diagnosis from your doctor with the infections in your ears, and there was this question mark about what the future would look like in the pool, was there ever a debate in your mind? I know you're thinking, I've got to stay fit, I'm going to get on the bike, but was there ever the question in your mind of, I'm done, this is it, this is the end?
No, I don't think so. And I think that's largely because of the people I've chosen to surround myself by. Like, I've worked with it's probably a bigger group than I realised, but I work with a relatively small group of people and have done for a very long time. So whether that's sports medicine doctors, whether that's physiotherapists, whether that's advisors in physiology, I have my key people. And my swimming coach at the time, I'd been working with him from 1998. So I'd had, working with him for 7 years by the time eventually a joint decision that I switched sports. But the support I had from him and the belief that he gave me was just so important. And he said, well, it's a blip. It's 2005. It's not like it's a year where you're going to go back to the games at the end of the year. This is the year to be, unable to compete or unable to train, which is the year we're in now, isn't it? The year after the games. So he said, this is the right year to be having these hiccups. Just focus on the process of getting better and then assess where you're at. And I think for me, I did race in 2005 in the swimming pool. I was within a couple of hundredths of a second of a world record at the national champs in the 100 freestyle. And I kind of thought, well, I'd already made the decision to switch, but I knew that I'd gone back to being at the top of the swimming world rankings. So when I switched into cycling, I was world number one, although it wasn't an event that was televised, it wasn't a games year, it wasn't world championships, it was national champs I'd performed. And that's why it's so important to focus on your own performance, regardless of the level that you're at. It's so important to have those personal goals, because it means that in any situation, you can always assess yourself against yourself. And that's the best competition that you've got.
Going back to that meeting with that doctor where she said, you got to take this path, otherwise you're in trouble, which is me paraphrasing massively, but you get the gist.
Yeah.
When she said that, you mentioned the word longevity, because if you want longevity in the sport, I can't think of anybody that personifies longevity in sport better than you do. It's literally like, oh my goodness, she is still doing this, and not only doing it, but winning at it, which is extraordinary. We are not so very far away from the next games, which if you do it will be the 10th. Is it the goal? Is that what you're up for? Are you up for it?
Well, that's part of the bigger picture, isn't it? And I need to take it year by year. I think that's the really important thing, is that when you're a little bit younger, you take it games by games, because it's easier to look 4 years ahead. So I think for me, the mindset has been, what can I do and what don't I have control over right now? I have more control over that future if I focus on the little things. So ironically, right now, we're on a return to running rehab program because I can't sit on a saddle, and running will be the thing that will help me to get that cardio fitness back physiologically, to help me then when I get back onto my bike. So I'm really dialing it right back. And I think when the doctor said to me about longevity, I'd come back from my first games and I'd calculated in my head that if I did 8 games, I would be 42. Turns out I was 43 in Tokyo at my 8th games because of that delay for the pandemic. But that was sort of born out of a swimmer called Suki Brownston, who I think was 39 when she finally retired from swimming, which was an incredible age for swimming because of the training regime and the hours that you keep as a swimmer and just what it does to your body and your shoulders particularly. And I remember thinking, oh, if Suki can do that. So for me, she was so clever. Like, it was almost like she could read my mind, and I feel really fortunate. And now everything is a bonus. And certainly since the children arrived, and I've become a better athlete since Louisa and Charlie arrived, both physically and I think as a complete person. I've got physically stronger, faster. My world record on the track in Tokyo for the 3,000 meters was beyond where I could have ever imagined I could have got to with that event. And I've learned so much about that juggle and managing it so that they're still front and center of what we do, but I've still been able to perform and win races.
Well, that is the most extraordinary part of all of it. So you, like you say, you've just kept getting, since that Barcelona Games in 92, you've just got better and better and better. And even, so often, it's spoken about as having a children could be the end of that version of a career, but you've been able to press on and really use it. What do you do to make the juggle work and also perform at that top level? Because anybody listening or watching will think, well, I can't possibly be Sarah, but there must be techniques that you can employ that actually can make that easier.
Yeah, so I think you have to have, your priorities. The children, we've always been number one, as any parent will say, and feeling comfortable about delaying training. Like, there are many ways to get the training done in the day. So I would, when they were very small and, breastfeeding on demand, I'd be sat in my kit waiting for that moment that they looked like they were in deep enough sleep. And
the rest of us, when that happens, by the way, for the rest of us, we go, yes, they're in deep sleep. I can now have a sleep. I can do that. Instead, you're like, how can I power on through?
Exactly. So I would learn, right, okay, I think they're sleeping enough. But for a little while, one of them was better at taking express milk out of a bottle than the other. So for a lot of the time, I did short sessions with Louisa, and then with Charlie, I knew I could go out for longer and be further away. A lot of the time, it was like, okay, let's just use the turbo trainer, like the static trainer in the utility room, so that I'm literally, I could touch them if I have to go and get them. I never got as far as breastfeeding whilst training. But I think it was just managing it around and finding those solutions. And for every single person, that's different. And, parents are all the time thinking, right, where's the best place to find my childcare? What's the best solution for my, routine? Do I drive to work? Do I drive to the station? Do I walk to school, walk to the station, get to work? Will the trains be reliable for me to get home for pickup? We're all doing that juggle all of the time. So people are actually doing what I'm doing, but probably don't give themselves recognition for it. And we're all just trying to juggle to make sure that the pieces of the jigsaw fit. And occasionally something out of our control lets us down. And lets down, and the cards fall down. So it could be, the train's cancelled, so you're not going to get home in time for pickup. And that's a problem because, school closes at 6 and they have to be picked up at 6. So having those plan Bs and Cs, I think we all have those as well. And so for me, the plan B was, well, I'll go on the turbo trainer if I can't go outside because baby's not happy. And now, Barney does the lion's share of the school runs and drop-offs, pickups, the clubs and things. And then I am the one that I'm out and about working, running the house, running the finances. We kind of do it as a team. And I think that's what all families do. You kind of split the workload, if you like. And this is what I normally do. This is what you normally do. And then we've got help from grandparents, or people might have childminders or nursery. And all of those are part of your village. And it's knowing and having your friends around as well, if they're part, your school, your children's school friends, parents. We often have texts in the mums WhatsApp group. I'm sure all the schools are the same, going, I'm stuck in the supermarket car park. Somebody's crashed. I can't get to school. Will you grab little Jimmy or whatever? So you have that. And I think people don't realise all the time they're doing the same juggle, and they're doing it as well as, you know, I have been.
To come back full circle, final question. Looking back on your moment in time, Barcelona 1992, and the woman that you are now today, with these two young children who you're bringing up in the world that we're living in. If you were speaking to your younger 14 self now, what would you be saying to that girl to sort of give her the best piece of advice that you've got from your world of performance?
Listen to those trusted adults. You know, I think we talk about trusted adults quite a lot today because of the challenges that young people are facing with social media and the internet, and, you know, stranger danger, feeling safe on public transport and in public spaces. But trusted adults are so important. So for me, my parents, they were genius. They're like that cup of tea before training was just such a vital part of the bigger picture. The GP who got me straight away, the coaches that, you know, the two coaches I had when I was a teenager, one had been a deaf Olympian, and he was just immense at helping me. He knew I was having such a hard time at school, and he was immense with the way that things were when I went to training with him. And then the coach after him, he had a mantra that was said, why be ordinary when you can be extraordinary? And that's just something that I share with people all the time. Just remember, you can do that little bit extra for you, for your family, for whoever it is. So I think it would be to, you know, you're right to trust those trusted adults, listen to them, take on board their advice. And I did do that. You know, I did recognise when I needed to take on board that advice and work it out. So I would just tell her to stay on your path, because sport can be with you for life. And, you know, I think I'm personifying the fact that that's the case.
Yeah, you are. It's a top lesson. Sarah, thank you.
Thank you very much.